What are your night shift horror stories? Oh man, I hate recalling this story. I worked night shift at a rehab facility. We have a protected gate with a camera looking down from above and one of those doorbell cameras. In the office, the camera monitor is on one wall and the doorbell monitor is on another. I was doing some paperwork and see this guy walk past, stopped for a few seconds, then slowly turned around, walked back and stared up at the camera. And he kept staring. The facility is in a rough neighborhood, so I'm fairly used to folks hanging out around the gate and usually ignore it. But the way he was staring was off-putting. Like, his eyes and expression were hollow and dead, almost as if he were in deep thought about something horrible. I was pretty sure he was zonked on synthetics. I used the intercom to see if he was okay, but he just kept staring directly at the camera. We have a rule. If it's not hurt or trying to come through the fence, just let it be. No sense in engaging needlessly with somebody potentially hostile or fucking with the locals. Y'all, he stood there and stared at that camera for 2 hours. That same dead-eyed expression staring right at me. I did a round and came back to find him gone, which only creeped me out more. Used to work nights at a Home Depot. There was one time where for a week or so our store stayed open 24 hours. For the most part this wasn't really a problem. Typically nobody comes shopping for home improvement items at 2 in the morning. Except that one couple that came looking for marble countertops at 1:30 in the morning, and the woman was wearing a nice dress. I guess there was also that one young lady who came looking for a toilet paper roll holder a little after midnight. I had just gotten off my first break, and she was wearing jorts and one of those white with black belt stereotypical karate outfits. She was oddly specific about which roll holder to get, too. But the real story lies within the insulation. It was nearing 3 in the morning and me and another guy were stocking insulation, as well as fixing the bays and some such maintenance. A bunch of big R30s had fallen in their bay, and while I was sorting through them a fucking hand came out of the mess and grabbed my arm. I lost my mind enough for not only the guy the first was working with to freak out, but also for my boss, who was across the store, to come check out the commotion. Turns out a homeless drunkard had come into the store at some point, and I can only assume before the night crew showed up, and had made a nest in the insulation where he fell asleep. The dude was in bad shape, too. Like, far gone into whatever inebriation that we had to call the police to remove him. I was always a little more cautious around the insulation after it, for at least the time the store stayed open 24 hours. Not mine, but I used to work at a small hotel and the manager there told me a terrifying night shift story. It was about midnight when she got a call at the front desk from a man. He said that he's with his 8-year-old daughter who dances competitively and needed advice on what she should wear. She gave him some basic fashion advice. He asked my manager, "What about fishnet leggings? Do you think those are too sexy?" Then proceeds to talk in graphic detail about how he thinks his own daughter has been trying to seduce him for weeks and how he's starting to enjoy seeing her dance in these cute outfits. Meanwhile, my manager is looking through a computer system trying to figure out who this man is so she can call the cops. However, the room he was reportedly in was empty. The man ends up hanging the phone up before she could find out where he was truly calling from. A couple months later at around 11 p.m. my manager answers the desk phone. A familiar voice asked her if she could help him pick out an outfit for his daughter's next dance recital. She asked him, "Let me guess, you want to know if she should wear fishnet leggings?" The man immediately hangs up the phone. I used to work night shift as a care aide in an old folks' home. It was already creepy. The home was an old hospital that was converted. Some asshole kept walking around the courtyard after dark dressed as the Grim Reaper knocking on doors. It was actually really scary. He ran off and the facility got a security guard for a few weeks. Many years ago, I worked at a regional radio station in the middle of fucking nowhere, Australia. I was the overnight operator. Keep the overnight playlist running, set up for the morning, do all the manual checks for the next day, and jump on the desk if anything funky happens. I spent a lot of time sitting in what was essentially a tin shed in the middle of a paddock, with my dog, shoes off, listening to 50s. They spooked the kangaroos in the paddock, and one of them jumped head first through our office window. So there's me, barefoot and half asleep, when this 6 feet tall kangaroo smashes through the glass window. Blood and glass everywhere. My dog starts chasing the kangaroo, I'm chasing my dog, and the kangaroo bounds around the office, knocking shit off desks in the dark, bleeding everywhere. I ran and opened the studio bay doors, and my dog chased it outside. Where, I'm assuming, the poor thing, the kangaroo, was shot. Then I had to call my boss. Edit, Bandit, the dog, was fine. She lived a long and healthy life, occasionally being bullied by our pet cockatiel. Warning, medical gross stuff incoming. I worked in an emergency room. The worst night that comes to mind involves a patient that was bitten by a baby timber rattlesnake. He was bleeding out of every single orifice by the time he got to us. More blood than I'd ever seen before outside of a motorcycle vs 75 mph headfirst to asphalt. I don't remember how many doses of Crofab we gave him, but it was the hospital's entire supply. But trying to get him stabilized, arranging the helicopter transport to a bigger and better equipped facility. All the blood, those weren't the worst parts. The worst part was when the patient lost control of his bowels. I will never, ever, forget that smell. I spent the entire time standing by the door with a battery-powered fan and a handful of gauze pads saturated with cinnamon oil trying to reduce some of the smell. The doctor occasionally stuck her head out just so I could waft the cinnamon oil in her face. Yes, by some miracle, the patient did end up surviving, and as far as I know he made a full recovery. But the blood, the smell, and just the shock of it all. Yeah, never underestimate a baby timber rattlesnake. Many years ago I briefly had a job that started at 3:30 a.m. The job itself was very boring, but the commute was wild. The world is at its weirdest in the very early morning. Road hazards haven't been called in yet, so one day I pulled off the freeway and discovered that the off-ramp was completely flooded, deep enough that I have no idea how my car didn't stall. But the most interesting discovery was that if law enforcement has to raid a home, they do it around 3 or 4 in the morning because that's the best chance of everyone being peacefully asleep. One day I was nearly to work when I noticed something off ahead of me. I slowed down and came up to a massive police blockade, squad cars everywhere and absolutely crawling with heavily armed officers, but all in absolute silence. They silently waved me down a side street. Just a creepy, unsettling experience. Did hospital security for about 2 months. It was small hospital out in the sticks, so we were responsible for removing patients who had passed from their rooms and transferring into the morgue freezer. We had just brought a decedent to the morgue and right before we were about to transfer them to the freezer their cell phone rang. Granted, pretty tame compared to some stories, but at the time it gave us a decent fright. I was once staying late doing some scenic painting in a college campus theater. It was late, pitch black dark outside and very quiet in the building. A few of us were up on the stage, not really talking, just taking care of business when suddenly I saw out of the corner of my eye something go very quickly by the open door to the lobby. WTF? Then it went by again and I actually saw what it was. A guy with long hair, wearing pajamas and no socks or shoes. He was tiptoeing in a very exaggerated way, pulling his knees up very high and grinning. WTF? It sounds kind of funny, but it was creepy as hell. We all made eye contact and one of the other painters was just about to go shut the door when the dude walked right in. He stood there staring at us for a full minute. You could have heard a pin drop. He threw his arms out to the sides dramatically and said, "I am your savior, Jesus Christ." No one responded and he eventually walked out. I guess he was hoping to get more of a reaction. The door was promptly shut and locked behind him and security called. They were not impressed. Turns out that he was a patient at some sort of group home nearby and had done this multiple times. I still get creeped out to this day if I'm working in a theater at night though. I was closing supervisor at a grocery store and someone managed to shit between the bathroom and the exit doors at 8:59. We close at 9:00. You'd think, oh, there's literal shit on the floor, surely people will walk around it. No, instead they continue to plow through it, so now there's shit on multiple grocery carts. The exit is scattered with feces. There's shit on people's shoes undoubtedly, and there's shit in the parking lot. Luckily for me, my less squeamish supervisor working with me that closing night volunteered to mop up the exit and bathroom, which to our surprise had also been shit on. For the record, human shit makes me immediately gag and vomit when I get a whiff of it, so I ended up puking in the trash next to the shit exit. Worked at a distress center almost 10 years ago. Was on the 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. shift. Got about 2 phone calls each hour of the shift from the same guy saying that he's tied up in a room. His balls are tied up with leather straps. And his wife is getting banged by 5 giant black guys in the other room. Asked him each time if he's in distress and he says no every time. Kept telling him if he's not in distress then he shouldn't be calling and let him go. I just can't believe he was up from 12 to 6 a.m. to make those calls. Worked for a phone company in a call center a few years ago. There was a famous customer called the cigarette creep. He would call at late hours. Whenever he got in line with a male, he would instantly drop it and call again. When it was a female, he would introduce himself like a normal person and ask for random information about our services. Before the person started their response, he would then ask, "May I light a cigarette?" And then would masturbate while they talk. That's what people assume, which is probably right, since he would take care not to overstep and give enough reason for us to finish the call. but he would sometimes groan and say dirty stuff. It was 3 a.m. Popular Canadian coffee shop. There is one old baker in the back that rarely interacts with me past a dirty joke or a dirtier ditty from his Navy days. Other than that, I'm alone. Not another soul around the area, and I expect it to remain so for at least an hour yet. I'm boxing up the day-olds for the homeless shelter when I swear I see something out of the corner of my eye. It's behind me. I turn, then look down. There's a small child standing there. A native little toddler with a faux hawk staring at me intensely. I'm struck dumb with how absurd the situation is. How did he get behind the counter? I didn't hear the door open, or see him come through the counter. I scan the storefront. No one. I yell for the baker in case he has a friend or something visiting that lost their kid. He comes over, and like me, does a double take at the kid and is baffled. Kid starts muttering incoherently. I get him a glass of water and a donut hole, and the baker runs out of the store to do a perimeter of the block. I call the non-emergency line and explain I have a little kid with no parents. I can't get any information from the boy, just mumbles I can't make out. Police arrive. Baker comes back, says that he can't find anyone else in the streets. The guy from the 24/7 corner store said he'll keep an eye out. Police try to speak to the kid and also get nothing but mutterings and half-hearted gestures. They take him away. See them again for their morning coffee, and they told me the little guy walked several kilometers from the nearest reservation in the dead of night to my store. He had got into his parents' medicine cabinet and just walked out of the house. I'm floored. It must have taken that poor baby hours to get to me. Seeing him behind me like that in the dead of the night still shakes me. Spooked me more than the guy that threw a pot of coffee at me. The woman that tried to stab me with a plastic spoon because I refused to give her a metal one. And the dude that waited around for 4 hours hoping to catch me alone so he could teach me a lesson since I didn't have the flavor of bagel he wanted. Used to work night shift at a middle school. Every night while cleaning out the boys' locker room I would hear at least one locker slam shut, sometimes more. This creeped me out when I started, but after a couple of months I got used to it. One night while cleaning one of the girls' locker room, I heard a girl scream. I walked out of the locker room, even looked outside the building, didn't see anybody. Before that I worked at the high school. I'd randomly hear doors open. About a year ago I just got to the building to begin my shift. It was still dark out. Took me a second to work up the courage to go in. I was half expecting to see someone pop up out of nowhere when the halls lit up. That reminds me of an experience I had several years ago. I went through a bit of a period of working insane hours where I was regularly in the office until midnight. Usually I was in the building by myself after everyone else left by about 6 p.m. That suited me well. I could crank up the speakers and listen to music and get work done uninterrupted. One night at about 10 p.m. I paused the music and went to the kitchen to get myself a coffee. Then, all of a sudden I heard a voice coming from my office saying, "Hey." It was very loud. There was no mistaking it. It was a male voice. I nearly crapped my pants. Our office had actually been broken into about 2 months earlier. I slowly crept back to my office. The entire building, except for my office and the kitchen, usually had the lights turned off after everyone else left, so it was quite dark. As I was sneaking back, I heard some more indistinct but very loud rumbling coming from my office. I finally got to the corner where I could peek through the glass walls. There was no one there. I found out quickly where the noise came from. Sometime earlier I got this game CD of a late 90s first-person shooter called Redneck Rampage. The CD came with a screensaver that I ended up installing on my office PC. The screensaver was just one of the redneck characters from the game wandering across the screen, occasionally farting and occasionally just saying, "Hey." I never actually heard this before because I usually had the sound off during the day and didn't usually take long enough breaks at night for the screensaver to kick in. I can't even imagine constantly switching shifts like that. I worked nights and we hardly ever got our 2 days off together. When you are working night shift and you only get 1 day off, it's basically like not getting a day off. It sounds like you are probably quite familiar with this. So you work all night and have the next night off. You get off work in the morning and you have to go home and sleep because you have been up all night. Then you have your night off, but everyone else is sleeping and nothing is open, so it's not like you can do anything. And you need to stay up because you need to be able to sleep the next day so you'll be ready for your shift that night. So you spend your one night off watching TV or messing around on your phone. Morning comes around and you go to bed, then get up later and get ready for work feeling like you haven't had a break at all. Here's what I wrote in another comment. It really is. I worked nights for about 10 years while my kids were younger. We only had one car, so I would come home from work in the morning, drop one child off at school, drive across town to drop the other child off at his school, drop my husband off at work, then go home. Then I had about 6 hours to eat, wind down, and sleep before I had to wake up and pick both kids up from school. Then home for about 2 hours. Then pick up my husband. Then come home and nap while they ate dinner. Then get up and shower and get ready for work. My sleep was pieced together with a couple hours here, an hour there, etc. I was so incredibly exhausted all of the time. I missed dinner with my husband and kids almost every night and missed out on so many family events also I could try to squeeze in a tiny bit more sleep. Between the utter exhaustion and hardly ever doing anything but working, giving people rides, and sleeping, I barely felt human. Working late at my office workshop one night. I'm doing analyses that take a while to run, so I tend to snack and watch Netflix, or try and do another mundane task that needs to just run by itself. This is a big building, but I'm in the basement where no one goes, and the aircon shuts off at night with little ventilation so it gets warm. The horror story was more for the security guard that walked in on me, a 2 meters tall man, with no shirt on, heavily tattooed, eating cereal at like 3 a.m. walking around. I could never look him in the eye after that. Working third shift security at a condo, and a mother left the bathroom to check on their mac and cheese. Her 2-year-old drowned in the tub. Once the police were done, my boss called me and told me I had to go talk to the family and find out what happened, even though we knew from the police telling us. My daughter was about 2 at the time. It broke my heart to even hear the story from the guy the first relieved. And then I had to go ask the family to tell some rent-a-cop about it as well. I was working the Christmas Eve night shift in my local emergency department. The clock struck 4 a.m. on Christmas morning and the emergency buzzer sounded. A 74-year-old male patient had gone into a sudden cardiac arrest. The buzzer wasn't working properly, so we couldn't locate where exactly in the department it was coming from. Once we finally figured it out, we got in there and I took over chest compressions. A team of anesthetists, nurses, doctors, and 20 minutes later, we managed to get him back for just long enough for his family to come and say goodbye to him. What a shitty Christmas.